Oh, I'm back. I accidentally turned the video off, so this is going to be part 2 of the mold making process. So we are at the stage now where we're securing the frame, the mold making frame. We're securing it to the table. And we do that by smashing clay, pieces of clay, on the outside of all 4 corners. So we're smashing the clay down on the table, and we're bringing it up and smashing it up and sticking it to the side of the frame. So now all 4 corners have clay there. All right, next step is on the inside edge and up, we have to put clay. So we smear it and smash it in that edge. And let me see if you can see here. Again, I like to roll it into little snakes. Looks like this. Then you just smear it into the edge. And what we're doing is not only is this helping secure the frame to the table, but it also it's preventing the plaster, because the plaster, when we mix it with water, it's very liquid and it'll flow right out on the ground if we don't do this carefully. Make sure we fill all the gaps with clay. We're going to be using plaster, molten plaster, pottery plaster. It's used in several different applications in the ceramic process. The type of plaster that I'm using today is called Super Duro, and it's from Valdemar Efson of Oslo. And it's a little bit different than the plaster I used back in the United States, which I'm having shipped here because first of all, because it's a lot less expensive, even with the tax. But in the future, I'll just be using Norwegian plaster. But the Super Duro, it sets very quickly, which is not a bad thing, but you have to be quick. The kind of plaster I've used in the U.S. takes about 10 minutes, 20 minutes to harden up. So, but it's not meant for pottery. It's meant for construction, for drywall. So they both work just fine. Just got to be quicker with the Super Duro. Okay, we're getting here. This is what takes the longest. Because I'm using this African clay, it's really kind of gritty, and it's not as smooth, so it takes a little bit longer packing this. Just because I don't want to tear up my fingers. Getting there though. Okay, so this is the traditional, the standard way of making tiles, making plaster molds, pouring plaster molds. So this is a technique that I've mastered. I've been doing this now for 17 years. I've made over 1,000 molds. Some of the molds are so big that I know I'm probably one of the only people that can, very few artists are as big and strong as me that do ceramic work, that do tile work. And there are some, but I've made huge molds, and I make little teeny molds, and I make molds that you can make several tiles out of all at once. And then I've also taught myself how to make they're called air release die molds using hydrostone, or using a very dense plaster that's not the same kind of plaster that we're using today. It's used for making models and for you know, if you're making, like, let's say you're doing a template for, or you're making a protocol for a new car or something, it's a plaster that they would use to make those types of things. The kind that I have is called hydrostone, and it is it's really cool to make tiles using this. But it's kind of it's kind of tricky. I taught myself how to do it. There's as far as I know, there's no college course you can go to that teaches you how to do it. So I'm going to have that technology here. I'm going to have the press here that uses it. I'm going to show you how you can make them out of wood, and you don't need the metal die rings to make them. But what's really cool is that I can, instead of just having one mold where you hand press the tiles, the hydrostone allows you to make multiple tiles all at once in one day. I can make up to, with not very much trouble at all, I can press 200 to 300 tiles in a day, versus with one mold I can only do maybe 4, maybe 5 or 6 if there's not much humidity. So I'm looking forward for my press and all my stuff to arrive, and I can show everyone the way I can press tiles with that, because that's really cool. That's fun to do that. This is fun too. If you want to make tiles, you've got to learn how to do this. The hydrostone, it's really only practical to use it when you're making a tile that you're going to be doing multiples of, because the hydrostone is quite a bit more expensive. It's the die rings. You have to have die rings made to do it. If you can make them out of wood, then it's not too difficult. But you know, again, you gotta learn how to do it, and that takes time to learn how to do it. So. I'm looking forward to sharing that technology with everybody. You know, for instance, so if, let's say the Trondheim Marathon in September that I run in, let's say they ask me to I can make tiles for their event, for their medals, and this press really makes that possible. And I have one of the mechanics. You can do it without the press, but it's much faster and it's much less hassle to use the press when you're making it. I have 2 of the presses. One of them is in the United States still, and one of them is coming over in the sea. On the ship, which should be here in a couple weeks, 3 weeks maybe. I got a call, get the details on tomorrow. But I'm really looking forward to showing everyone how to use that press here in Norway, and and how to make hydrostone dies, air release dies. I hope if any ceramicists or anyone here, I'm sure they know how to do it in Norway. I'm sure there's someone here who does it, but I haven't seen anyone do it in Norway. I haven't heard of anyone doing it. You know, I'm sure like Porsgrund, they probably do it. Porsgrund is probably the ceramic company in Norway. They've been making everything from toilets to china, coffee cups, everything out of porcelain, mainly. Okay, there we go. I'm gonna go get some water for pouring the molds. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. I have water. Okay, next step is putting the tiles into their proper spots. Okay, here, I'm going to teach you now. This is kind of a crash course. I can do just a video on how to fix broken tiles, but I'm just going to... So these tiles are fine. I'm going to go with those how those are. Okay, this tile has two issues. Obviously, number one, it's broken. And number two, it's too thin. So, there's an easy way to fix this. Okay, first of all, to remedy the thinness, because I made them too thin so that I could have extra clay to use during my time here before I had a chance to make any molds in Odda. So what you do is you put balls of clay on the bottom of the tile, like so. What that does is that'll lift the tile up. You kind of smush it down carefully. So that'll lift the tile up and it'll make it thicker. The broken piece, again, we're going to do the same thing because we have to lift this up too. The clay balls are actually also kind of acting as a glue that will hold it in place. So right where the break is, it'll stay there. Now the plaster, when I pour the mold, the plaster will go into that little crack, but those burrs, there'll be little burrs that'll be left over on the mold. You can see the crack there. But there'll be little burrs that are left over when the mold dries and I take the tile out, that you can easily sand away and trim off, and the tile will be fine. Okay, so next one here, this one's broken in several pieces, and it's also too thin, so we have the same issue. Again, not a problem, you just have to be patient. Put the balls of clay on the back of the tile, like we did before. Again, I'm really good at this. I've done this a lot, so I can be a little sloppy. You might want to kind of figure it out on your own when you do it yourself. Probably 10 of 150, 175 tiles broke. It's just transporting everything. I had them so thin, it's just going to happen. It happens a little bit. But like I said, we are able to fix that. And it won't be a problem. So, this tile broke in 4 pieces. Just takes a little bit more time. And then another thing you can do is you can kind of smush a little bit of clay right along the edge where the cracks are after you stick them down. And what that does is that just holds it in place so that when you pour the plaster over it, you know for sure it's not going to slide around. When you're doing this with these breaks, you have to be careful of that. So you see, you can see the breaks, but like I said, I'll be able to sand those. I'll be able to sand those away and trim those burrs of plaster off where those cracks are, and you won't even be able to notice it unless you're like an expert. Like me, I'll be able to recognize it. Again, all of these are a little bit too thin. I did that on purpose, so I'm going to put some clay in the back of them. It's really important to make sure you get this clay on there and make sure it's sticky, because what will happen is you're actually creating an air bubble underneath the tile, and it might lift up. That air bubble will lift the tile up. I have a couple here that happened to, and I didn't know that. I've never done this before. Exactly like this. So a couple of my tiles lifted up. Again, didn't destroy it, but just made it a little bit more of a challenge cleaning the mold out. Okay, so let's move on to the mixing of the plaster. Okay, so you see there, I washed my hands in this water. This is fresh water out of the tap. It's cold. The warmer the water, the faster the plaster sets. So this here is cold water. However, this Super Duro plaster that I use, it sets really fast. So it's good that the water is cold because it makes it slower set. So let me see if you can see in the bucket. Okay. Now, the way I was taught to pour the plaster into the water is that when you start pouring the plaster in, and I've done this so much, I know I can do this quickly. But when you're first learning, you pour the plaster in, you can use a scoop, you can use your hand. The plaster doesn't irritate my skin at all. They use plaster to make casts of body parts and stuff, so you don't want to eat it, but it's not like cement, where cement has lye in it and lime and it burns your fingers. This doesn't have that. So you pour the plaster in until, the way my dad taught me, that islands will form. So it's kind of like putting powdered sugar into coffee, except we're putting so much powdered sugar into our coffee here that the coffee becomes so saturated with powdered sugar that it starts to fill up and go up above it. It saturates it. So you can't put any more plaster in it because it's reached the saturation point. So this plaster sets very fast. Much faster than my plaster in the US I use. So I got to move it here. So the islands have not formed yet. I'll tell you when they do, you'll see it. There we go, see the island? So you kind of got to want to wait. Once the islands form. Okay. Now when I first started making tiles, I used a stick to mix the plaster. But then, so I think it's good to learn with a stick. So you see here, there's the island. I think it's good to learn with a stick, and then eventually graduate to the mold, to the mixer, but it doesn't make a big difference. It's always good to learn the rudimentary ways of doing something, like making tiles. Because when you go through the very archaic ways of doing it, and you learn those ways first, that always is a foundation to build on. So then you can move up to the mixers later on. So how do you know how thick the plaster should be? Well, again, that's something you learn. This is just clay water in here. Ideally, the plaster should flow. You don't want it so thick where it's like maple syrup or honey. You want it more fluid than that. But you don't want it so fluid that it runs right off of let's say you pour it on the table or something. You want it kind of a little bit of thickness to it. You also want to get the chunks out as much as possible. However, it's not the end of the world if you have some chunks in there. Okay, that's good. Again, this plaster sets really fast. Okay. Now let's get back up here and pour the plaster. Okay, I'm back. Okay. One thing you should be aware of is that you need to sometimes you should put water. When you have a design that's very detailed, you want to put water, usually a little spritzer or a spray gun, to spray some water on the plaster, or on the clay, because what that does is it gets water into all the little grooves of the design you've made. And it breaks the surface tension so that when you're pouring the plaster follows where the water goes. And it gets into those little grooves with more. And you see these little chunks of plaster that are dripping off in the bucket. Ideally, you don't want that, but it's not going to be a big problem. I've never known that to be a big problem. Now again, I'm just splashing a little bit of water in the middle of the tile, because when I pour the plaster onto the tile, it spreads the water out onto the design. That's what all I have today. Now you see this plaster is already hardening up, so I gotta move. Gotta move, folks. Again, see, it's starting to get hard. I can still pour the plaster, but it's getting thick. You kind of got to shake it a little bit. It gets kind of like cornstarch right now. And you gotta kind of jiggle it as soon as you pour it, so it levels it out. Okay. So sometimes again, this plaster sets very quickly. The plaster that I'm getting that's coming over the shipment from the United States is it sets in about half an hour. But okay. So just so you know, this is not the ideal way of doing it. You just want to be able to pour it in. But I've done this enough where I know that this will be okay. I've used this plaster. So what you can do now to smooth this out is you can take a stick to level it out, or a piece of wood, or your ceramic kidney. And then when I'm all finished, I have a tool called an awl. I don't know what it is in Norwegian, but I'll be able to file it down flat. Sometimes you got to take your chances. With fast drying plaster, you just got to do what you can do. There we go. All right, so I'll let these dry now. Again, this is it's best to pour it when it's all liquid. Sometimes you have to race the plaster, and I know this will be okay, this one here in the end, but I really had to kind of float the plaster down into the design. The water I sprinkled on it first. It'll be okay. It'll be perfect in the end. Usable mold, like all these here. So I'll wait about a half an hour and remove these. So that is basically how you make plaster molds for tile making.